Hello and welcome to everybody on Cloud Fitness. So today's video is again in continuation to my Azure Data Factory interview questions play series, and this video is part 5 in that. So again, we are going to cover all the related topics and questions which are covered in most of the Azure Data Factory interviews. So the first question for today is, how do you send email notifications on your pipeline failures? So this is again a very common interview questions, and there are numerous ways to do it. So what I'll discuss over here is the most optimal ones. There are a lot of different ways in which you can enable notifications, but now today we are going to discuss about logic apps with web or webhook activity, and then we are going to talk about alerts and metrics. So if you go back to the portal over here, then you will see that in Data Factory, if you go to the Manage tab over here, you will see that there is an option. In fact, not here, the monitor tab on the left hand side. If you go and check out here, you will see on the left hand side alerts and metrics option in this side. So the moment you click on this particular option, you can see that you have an option to create a new alert rule. So right now, of course, I do not have any pipeline. It is just for your demo purpose, but you can check out that you can create multiple alerts over here. You can check the severity of the alert. So let's say the severity is high, it's 4, and then you can you can have n number of criterias based on which you want to set alert conditions. So let's say you want to set alert conditions for the failed activity, right? So let's say you select this particular option, and then you can go ahead, click on continue. Like that, you will have multiple options over here to select from, and you can customize it for anything, absolutely anything. You can actually see that it will ask you that for what kind of activity you are actually trying to create this alert or create this matrix for. So right now I have a copy activity, let's say. So in my data factory, I just have a copy activity right now, but you might have an n number of activities. So you can select those activities, and you can even select multiple activities at a time as well. So like in case any of those activity fails, you can see that you can set up alerts for the same. Similarly, it will ask you for the activity name and for which pipeline does that activity belongs to, and the failure types and multiple things, right? What kind of failure you want to send that alert for, right? It might be a system error, it might be a user error, it might be a bad gateway, whatever, right? And in the similar way, if you want to have a particular condition, right, in that case also you can set up the alert logic conditions, right? And what is the period in which you want to check these alerts and metrics. So all those things you can go ahead and you can click on add criteria, and when you do that, you can have your emails going on, you can have your SMS also going on, right? So this is one way in which you can I'm not going in detail because this is not a tutorial video, otherwise I would have shown you in detail and how it works, but it is mostly from interview perspective, you should know where everything is. So this is alerts and metrics, where you can go ahead and select the options, and then the second option is using the logic app. So I have created this logic app resource for this video itself. So even in this logic app, you can actually see that you have an option for when HTTP request is received. So the moment you click on this particular option, you will see in the logic apps, you can click on new step over here. So let me search for Gmail. You have this Gmail over here, and you have an option to send email. So basically here what you'll do is you'll configure the your username, password, manage identity, or whatever you're trying to connect to. It can be Gmail, it can be Outlook, or whatever service account you have to send emails for. So you can select your the connector over here to send an email, and when an HTTP request is received, if you see it over here. So once I provide all these configurations, right, after that, if I save this logic app, in that case a URL will be generated over here, right? So the moment this URL is generated over here, I can copy this URL, and then I can go back to my data factory pipeline, and let's say I want to send an email whenever my let's say one particular copy activity fails. Now in that case, you see on the in the copy activity, you have this particular option of plus symbol, right, add an output. So let's say I click failure. So the moment I click failure, I can go ahead and select web or webhook activity. Let's click on webhook activity, and then if you go ahead and connect these, So what will happen is on the failure of copy activity, it will trigger this webhook. And what this webhook will do, this webhook will actually trigger the URL. Now this URL is the same URL which is generated over here. So what happens is, again I'll talk about the flow. Copy data activity, it fails, it triggers the webhook activity, and then webhook activity in turns goes to this particular URL which you will type in here, right? So this URL is the same here URL as here. So the moment this URL is clicked or a request is received for this particular HTTP, then what happens is automatically it will go ahead and you can it will go to your send email step and it will send out the email. So like this is also one way, and this can be done both by web and webhook. There is a small difference between web and webhook activity, although because webhook activity, if you see, it is mostly a post method, right? So but that is not the case with web. So for this you might want to know a little bit about APIs as well. So you can, this is a very safe and good option if you want to send emails for the data factory failures. And then I'll go back to my PPT and I will move forward with the next question. So I hope you are all clear with this email notification. So whenever this question is asked, a very important question which is definitely asked actually, alerts and metrics, and second is the logic apps. After that, this is again, a very basic question, I would say. Describe the use of ADF in your project, or it is asked in multiple ways. Describe the project you have worked on. So I assume that you people, everybody have a project, right, where you have worked on ADF, even if it is, a very small part of it. You should be able to describe it really well. So these are two scenarios which I feel you can easily pull in, right? So I'm not going to here explain you about a particular client or a particular product that you must be building, right? I cannot replicate my projects over here, but I can just give you a little bit of idea that you should know your project end to end first. This is the very first thing. Whenever an interviewer asks you to describe your project, he or she is essentially trying to understand that how much you know about the project that you have worked on. Were you involved end to end or not? So you should be able to describe it end to end first. And then coming on, first you should describe it end to end. After that, coming on to the ADF part, if you are interviewing it for the ADF, then in that case, you can have these scenarios. Let's say that from XYZ sources, you were actually getting the latest files, or like you were getting files from in ADLS Gen 2 from XYZ sources. Now these files you were actually trying to copy only the latest files. And regarding copying of the latest files also, I have explained in my previous video. You can go ahead and watch that. So you can say that the files had timestamp, for example, right, in their name. So from that, you were actually, through copy activity, you were trying to, pull in the latest files and then load the data into Azure SQL database. Now, in the very first point, if you want to exaggerate, you can definitely add, that while copying the data, you were also, trying to do some transformations. You were trying to check the size of the file, let's say. Now, when you say that I was trying to check the size of the file, in that case interviewer will actually ask you that what activity you were using for that. Now in that case you will go ahead and say that I was using get metadata activity, right? Because in get metadata activity you have an option to see the size. Now from that you were actually checking the size of the file, and only if the size of the file was, let's say, greater than 100 GB, then only you were going ahead and loading that file in the SQL database. You can come up with these kind of scenarios. But whatever you say, you should know that. It should not be like you said, but you don't know about it. So this is one aspect of it. So usually people use ADF, mostly for the copy activities. Very few projects will actually use a full-fledged data flows for it. I'll also explain you why. Then second option is again that you had files coming in from ADLS Gen 2, and then you were copying it, and then you were copying it to some other data lake, let's say. You can say that I was trying to copy it into a staging layer, and then from staging layer we were again taking up the taking up the files. We were trying to do transformations on that, and then we were trying to load it to a database. Now you can here explain a lot of things, right? You can say that the very first thing that you were trying to catch up latest files, right? And you can describe a method for catching up your latest file, which I have already discussed in my previous video. So this is one part. Second thing that you can describe over here is that you were trying to create a lot of transformations on this. You were trying to do a lot of business logics on this, right? So you can describe like whatever activity you are comfortable with. So you can describe those transformations. So let's say you can say that there was a Databricks notebook which I was trying to call in Data Factory, right? So once the copy is done, we were actually trying to run a particular code in Databricks, right? And that Databricks notebook activity we were calling in Data Factory. After that, you can say like we were sorting the data, we were trying to look up to a particular table, lookup activity, like those kind of things you can actually pull in. So already I have explained a lot about transformation. You can go ahead, check out the transformation and add as per your knowledge. So use only the transformation which you are comfortable with. And then you can say I was loading it to the database. Now, once you say this, interviewer will definitely ask you that you are trying to, copy the data from cloud to a database. Now, whenever the cloud to database comes, your performance will definitely decrease. Then they will definitely ask you, then why did, what did you do for the performance, right? In that case, you can actually go ahead and answer it. I have also explained it in, I think, my first or the second video of Azure Data Factory interview series. That in copy activity itself you have settings, right, to increase the degree of copy parallelism, which actually helps you a lot to compress and decompress the data. You can go ahead and watch the video in the play series, it's there. So that question comes up. So these are the few things that you should be able to explain when a person asks you for the use of ADF in your project, right? And try to stay away from saying something really weird. When I say weird, trust me, most of the projects they will not use ADF for very complex tasks, right? They are not going to create or build a huge lots of data flows, or they are not going to use a lot of transformations, right? Most of the projects, they don't do that. For those kind of work, for those kind of operations, people usually prefer going for Databricks, because right now there is huge lot of data coming in. You have streaming data as well. So Databricks suits the purpose very well over there. So ADF mostly people use for copy activity and for little bit of transformations here and there, mostly like calling Databricks notebooks, or maybe for error handling purpose in between. Those questions might come up, but do not explain a very complex project over here where you have used a lot of transformation, because that doesn't work out. Usually it's not feasible to do all those things in ADF, and people usually don't do it. They'll go for Databricks for doing that. So now let's move on to the next question that we have. How do you test your pipelines when you have created code in feature branch? So this is also a very good question. In fact, that actually tells whether you have really worked on data factory or not, because this question, a person who will answer, that person would have definitely worked on it. So let's say you have created your feature branch in Data Factory. Now you are trying to build your code in your feature branch. Now in that case, you will not be able to trigger your pipeline, right? In that case, you have to use debug mode to test your pipelines. In fact, let me go back to the portal. So if you see over here, right now I am in the Data Factory mode. I do not have any code repository set up. But if I have this code repository set up, I will essentially use this debug option over here to test my pipelines, right? I'm not going to have triggers. Triggers option will not be available. So most probably you will not be able to trigger it. Or trigger is not the good option over there. So interviewer essentially wants to know that whether you know this part of debug or option or not. So you will always say that you use debug option to test your pipelines in any feature branch whenever you are working in a feature branch. So let me go back, and then I have next question for you. So the next question is, how do you log pipeline execution details to database? So now this is also something very common that people do this. So whenever you execute a pipeline, people want to have all the details related to that pipeline execution stored in the database, right? So for that, you should know that, and you can do it through stored procedure activities, right? If I go back to the stored procedure, let me go back to the data factory and let me show you. Let me type in here stored procedure, and here you go, right? So you have the stored procedure over here, and you can actually see that whenever you have a stored procedure, you'll give the name for the database, like you'll give the link service or the connection to the database, and then you have the stored procedure over here, right? And then you can actually pass on the parameters over here, right? You can actually pass on system defined parameters, right? So in fact, let me give it a name. Let's give it test. Okay, this is a parameter, and then you can click on this value option, add dynamic content, right here. So once you click on add dynamic content, you can actually see the system variables over here, right? What it shows you: data factory name, pipeline group ID, pipeline run ID, pipeline trigger name, trigger time, type, you know, all the functions. And in fact, you can customize it also as well using this dynamic content option. So let's say I trigger, like let's say I click this, right, trigger type and everything. So like that, you can actually go ahead and you can pass on the parameters to the stored procedure, and this stored procedure is actually created in database, right? So the moment this pipeline runs, you will actually take all these parameters from the data factory and load it into the database, right? And this becomes a log table, right? And this is just a log table that you can actually create. So you should know about this, and interviewers might definitely ask you for this as well. So this was pretty much that I wanted to cover. And in fact, let me have one more question. Okay, so you have next question, which is, have you used get metadata activity? So typical answer will be yes. You will not say that I have not used get metadata activity, because it is a really basic activity and you should know that. Can you give one use case for the child item property in get metadata activity? Now, when I say this, if you say yes to this question, right, you should be able to answer it. Now let me go back to the data factory and let me pull in get metadata, right? So here is your get metadata, and the moment you click on it, right, let me click a random data set. Now in this, you will see that there is an option of field list, right? And you have arguments over here. Get metadata. Let me in fact decrease the font so that you can all see here. So you can see that there is the list of arguments that are present, right? So you can see that the, right now it is a file. So if I add a folder over here, it is a binary text file, right? So it is giving me field list based on this particular data set. If I choose a folder over here instead of file, then in that case what will happen is it will show me just like this. It will also show me child items. So child items is nothing but it will tell me that inside a folder what all child items are present, what all items are present inside the folder. So if you have a folder test, inside that test folder, if you have multiple files, it will tell you that these are the file presents, these are the file present, these are the configurations of the file present. So child items is that actually. Now interviewer is trying to first understand that have you used get metadata activity? You said yes. Second question, give me a use case of child items, right? Now he's trying to understand that whether you know about child items or not. You should know about child items. So whenever you select data set as a folder, right now it is file, okay? So if you select data set as a folder, automatically child item option will appear over here. Now this child item option will actually give you the list of files which are present. So when he asks you for a use case, he's trying to understand that have you implemented anything related to child items get metadata activity in your project. Now for this, you are going to say that yes, you can use child item, and you should say that you have used it also in your project to get the count of the files which are present in the folder, right? And then you can say that you are verifying that how many files are present inside the inside that particular folder. So let's say you can say that I was verifying that 5 files are present in that folder, and then I was looping it through a if condition. So if the number of files are greater than 5 or equal to 5, then process the further flow. So like that, you should be able to answer that this child items can actually be used to understand how many files are present, to get the count of the file present. So this is also one of the very interesting and very legitimate questions. And so thank you so much for being till here. I am done with my questions for today. I'll come back with another set of questions in my next video. Do let me know in the comment sections if you have any doubt, and do remember to like, share and subscribe to this video. Thank you so much.